She walked into the hangar like a ghost, helmet under her arm, uniform faded, eyes burning with something no one could name. The squad laughed. She won't even last a minute up there. One sneered, but her silence carried weight, the kind only carved by war. No rank, no medals displayed. No one knew her name. All they saw was a woman in a world of men. But what they didn't know, what they were about to witness, was that this so-called nobody once ended an entire war alone. The question is, how? Under the biting cold of dawn, the base still shivered under silence when she arrived. No fanfare, no applause, not even the weight of recognition in the air. Just her boots pressing into the frost, a worn helmet clutched under one arm, her eyes dark with something no one else could read. Around her, young pilots laughed, too loud, too careless. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she carried inside her. To them, she was just a woman, another name they hadn't bothered to learn, someone who didn't belong among their ranks of fire and steel. She kept walking, every step deliberate, measured, as though she had made this walk 1,000 times before in another lifetime. But the truth was, she hadn't walked it here. Not this runway, not this war. Yet something about the scene pressed against her chest with a cruel familiarity, like ghosts calling from every direction. Her breath fogged in front of her face. Her hands trembled, though not from the cold. The commander stood waiting, his uniform perfect, his expression sharp with doubt. He looked her up and down once, and already decided she wasn't enough. The others whispered behind his back, laughing at the absurdity of putting her in a cockpit. They'd flown, they'd fought, they'd bled. But her? She had nothing to prove she belonged. Nothing except scars she never showed. Still, when she placed her helmet on, the laughter dulled into silence. It wasn't the helmet itself, but the way she wore it, the precision, the ritual, the quiet weight of someone who had done this too many times to count. Her glove slid into place, her visor snapped down, and for a moment, the frostbitten air trembled with something unspoken. Engines screamed to life. The sound shook through the hangars, the ground, their chests. The others ran, mounting their machines, blades of fire tearing open the morning sky. She followed, slower, calmer, stepping into her jet with a presence that unnerved even those who didn't believe in her. No one spoke now, not because they respected her, but because something about her silence unsettled them more than arrogance ever could. She pulled the canopy shut. Inside the cocoon of steel and glass, her world shrank to instruments and memory. Fingers danced over switches like second nature. She didn't need to think. Her body remembered what her mind tried to bury. The first strike came sudden. The sky lit with flames, engines howled in terror, and enemy shadows ripped through the clouds. Radios filled with shouting, men panicking calling die. Jets spun out of control. Bodies turned into fireballs across the horizon. One by one, her comrades vanished in smoke and wreckage. She didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed, locking on the first enemy target. Her jet surged forward, slicing through chaos like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The others screamed orders, begging, desperate, but her voice never joined theirs. She was a ghost in the comms, silent, deadly, unseen. Missiles hissed from her wings. Flames tore through the sky. One enemy down. 2. Then 3. She didn't stop. She couldn't. The world narrowed into crosshairs and explosions, her breathing steady, her pulse unshaken. 8 jets fell to her hands before the sky finally cleared, smoke trailing across the broken horizon. On the ground, silence fell heavier than any thunder. She landed without ceremony, her jet scarred, engines groaning but alive. As she stepped out, the soldiers who had mocked her hours before stood frozen, their salutes trembling. One by one, they raised their hands, not out of duty but awe. The commander lowered his head, shame burning in his chest. She walked past them all. No smile, no arrogance, no acknowledgement. Just steady steps, her shadow stretching long across the tarmac. It wasn't pride in her eyes. It wasn't even victory. It was the quiet weight of someone who had been here before, who had carried this silence all her life. And as the sun broke through the smoke, they all finally understood. She wasn't just another pilot. She was the storm they never saw coming. The next morning, the base felt different. The air was heavier, charged with something unsaid, something hanging over every salute and every clipped order. Soldiers went about their duties, but whispers moved faster than commands, circulating like wildfire. Everyone knew by now, she wasn't just another pilot. She had walked into their sky and rewritten what courage looked like. 8 enemy jets torn apart in one dogfight, all by her hands alone. But recognition wasn't what she came for. She walked across the base slowly, her boots crunching against the gravel, her flight suit still carrying the marks of battle. Oil stains, singed fabric, and the faint smell of smoke clung to her like a metal she never asked for. Her helmet hung at her side, the visor cracked, but her eyes, those steel blue eyes, burned brighter than ever. She wasn't broken. She wasn't intimidated. She was alive, and she had lived through hell in the sky. The soldiers who once looked past her now stood at attention when she passed. They had mocked her, some even dismissed her as a token placement, a publicity stunt for diversity in the ranks. Now their eyes followed her with reverence, with something close to awe. But behind it all, guilt flickered. They hadn't believed in her. They hadn't seen her for what she truly was. And the general, oh, the general. He stood at the far end of the runway, watching her like a man weighed down by his own pride. His chest was still puffed, his metals still polished, but his jaw clenched each time her footsteps drew nearer. She had done what even he could not have dreamed of, what his carefully chosen man hadn't managed. She had made him look small, without ever meaning to. The silence between them was heavier than the roar of jet engines. Her shadow stretched across the concrete, finally reaching his boots. She stopped. Around them, the airmen and ground crew froze, waiting. Nobody dared breathe too loudly. Her presence filled the space, not with arrogance, not with victory chants, but with something far more devastating truth. The truth that bravery doesn't wear the face you expect. The truth that heroism isn't born from rank or recognition. You doubted me. Her voice was low, calm, but each word cut like steel. The general didn't flinch. He didn't admit it. He didn't have to. His silence was an answer in itself. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The man of power, and the woman who had shattered the invisible ceiling that had tried to cage her. And as the soldiers lined the runway, something unexpected happened. One by one, they raised their hands to their brows. A salute. It started with a young mechanic, his face streaked with grease, eyes wide and trembling. Then a group of pilots followed, their expressions mixed with shame and pride. And then the rows of soldiers, officers, and crew, all of them, saluted her. Not the general, not the flag fluttering behind them. Her. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She simply stood there, letting the weight of the moment sink in. But inside, deep inside, her heart ached. Because behind every victory there were ghosts, faces she'd never forget. Her comrades who hadn't made it home, the missions that had left her scarred, the whispers of loss that visited her every night. She had survived, yes, but survival always came with a price. And she knew this wasn't over. That night, alone in her quarters, she unzipped her flight suit and sat on the edge of her bed. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones, where adrenaline fades and reality sets in. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had controlled the stick, pressed the trigger, sent 8 aircraft spiraling into flames. 8 enemies gone. 8 sons, brothers, maybe fathers gone. Her stomach churned. Nobody would see this side of her, not the soldiers who saluted, not the general who clenched his jaw in shame. Nobody would understand that beneath the helmet, beneath the call sign, and the legend already being whispered, she was still human, and humanity was heavy. A knock rattled her door. She didn't answer at first. Silence felt safer, but the knock came again, softer this time. She opened the door and found a young cadet standing there, barely 20, his eyes wet with something he was trying hard to hide. "Ma'am," he stammered. I just wanted to say thank you. You saved lives out there. You saved us." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something simple. something that wouldn't reveal the storm inside her. But words failed. So instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and firm, and nodded. The boy's chin quivered, and then he saluted before disappearing back into the night. She closed the door, leaning her forehead against the cold metal. His gratitude burned into her, reminding her of why she kept flying, why she kept fighting. Not for glory, not for medals. For them, for the ones too young to carry the kind of weight she bore. The next morning came with orders. They wanted her back in the air. Of course they did. The general handed her the papers, without looking her in the eye. His voice was tight, controlled. Mission briefing at 0500. You'll lead the squadron. She took the papers, her hand steady. No hesitation, no flinch. The room was watching. Junior officers, senior pilots, strategists scribbling on maps. They expected her to be proud, maybe even smug. But she wasn't. She was something else entirely. Resolved. Because for her, every flight could be the last. Every takeoff was a gamble against fate. She didn't fear death anymore. She feared failure. Failing the ones who believed in her now. Failing the soldiers who looked to her like proof that the impossible could be done. At 0500, she walked into the briefing room. The lights were dim, the map lit with red lines and enemy positions. Pilots sat in neat rows, their eyes locked on her as she entered. Not a laugh, not a whisper this time. Respect. Silence. Anticipation. She stood at the front, her helmet tucked under her arm, and for the first time, she spoke not as the outsider, not as the underestimated one, but as their leader. Her voice didn't shake. We fly together. We fight together. And we return together. No one gets left behind. The words echoed in the room, carried by something stronger than authority, conviction. And as the squadron prepared for what lay ahead, every single one of them knew this wasn't just another mission. This was history in the making. But deep in the corner, the general sat with his arms folded, watching her. His pride still stung, his authority cracked. And in his silence lurked a question he couldn't shake. Was he witnessing the rise of a legend, or the beginning of something that would break her beyond repair? The night after her first battle was not a quiet one. The city below still smoldered, its skyline scarred by the flames of war. Yet high above, in the military compound where the survivors gathered, silence carried more weight than the gunfire that had preceded it. The young woman, pilot, warrior, survivor, walked into the hangar as though gravity itself had grown heavier on her shoulders. Her uniform was torn, stained with oil, soot, and blood that wasn't all her own. Her eyes, however, were sharper than ever, carrying the memories of the sky she had just conquered and the cost that came with it. She hadn't meant to be a hero. That wasn't why she joined, why she trained, or why she flew. But now whispers followed her like shadows. Men she'd never spoken to looked at her with reverence, some with envy, some with disbelief. A single woman, outnumbered 8-1, had walked back from a mission none expected her to return from. The jets she destroyed were not just machines. They were symbols of an enemy that had mocked their defenses for months. And now, because of her, the unthinkable had been achieved. Still, she couldn't sleep. When she closed her eyes, she didn't see the explosions, the debris, the fire. She saw the faces of those who hadn't made it back. Her squadron had been small to begin with, and now smaller still. Men she had laughed with that morning were now part of the smoke rising from the ruins. Victory had a strange taste, sharp, bitter, almost metallic. She sat alone on a bench outside the hangar, the cold air biting against her skin, her breath a pale mist in the night. She ran her hand along the scar on her forearm, one she'd earned long before this war, back when she was dismissed as just another soldier with the stubborn streak. That scar reminded her that pain was temporary, but memories weren't. It reminded her of the life she had before all this, the days when no one believed she belonged in a cockpit, when she'd been told to clean floors rather than touch controls. And then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the hollow air. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. The general. He stood in front of her, hands clasped behind his back, eyes that carried both authority and judgment. For a long while, he said nothing, only stared as though trying to decipher the truth behind her silence. Finally, his voice cut through the night like a blade. "You disobeyed orders." She didn't flinch. She knew it was true. She had gone beyond her directive, broken formation, engaged in combat she wasn't supposed to. Yet if she hadn't, the entire base would have been wiped out. She lifted her gaze to meet his, her jaw set, her voice steady. "I saved lives." The general's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew harsher. At the cost of discipline, at the cost of unity. That is not how this army works. Her fingers curled into fists. He wasn't wrong, not by the book at least. But the book hadn't been up there in the sky. The book hadn't seen her brothers in arms fall one by one, hadn't heard their last words crackle through the radio. She had, and she had chosen to fight, not to retreat. "I didn't have the luxury of rules," she replied. "Not when they were dying in front of me." The tension between them was thick, the kind of silence that dared the other to break. And then, from the shadows of the hangar, a voice spoke. "She's the reason we're still alive." It was one of the mechanics, a young man whose brother had been in one of the jets she saved. Then another voice followed, a medic this time. Then another. Soon, a murmur rose among the gathered soldiers. Their words carried no hesitation, only truth. They weren't defending her out of pity. They were defending her because they had seen what she had done. The general looked around, his authority challenged not by rebellion, but by loyalty, loyalty to her. His face darkened, not with anger, but with something heavier. Shame. He had doubted her. He had called her reckless, unfit, too stubborn for her own good. And yet, when the moment came, she had been the one to stand when others fell. But he couldn't say that. Not now. Pride was a cage too heavy for him to break. He turned on his heel and walked away, his silence saying more than his words ever could. The pilot stayed seated, her chest rising and falling with the weight of it all. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need medals or speeches. She had what mattered, the lives she saved, the people who now looked at her not as a burden, but as a leader. The next morning, the war felt different. The enemy had retreated, if only for a while. The skies were quiet, though the silence was uneasy. Reports flooded in, her name, whispered beyond borders, spoken with both awe and fear. The enemy now knew her face, her call sign. They called her the Shadow Falcon, the woman who flew as though the sky itself bent to her will. Yet with fame came danger. They wanted her gone more than ever now. A bounty was whispered in the underground channels. Take down the Falcon, and you break the spirit of her people. She knew it. Her commanders knew it. And so, every time she strapped into that cockpit, she did so with the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her. But when she flew, all of it disappeared. The sky was hers alone. No politics, no shameful generals, no doubters. Just her jet, and the endless horizon. On the ground, things shifted. Soldiers who once mocked her now followed her silently. Mechanics treated her jet as if it were sacred. Civilians sent letters, prayers, and sketches of her victories. Children played pretend, raising their arms like wings and shouting her name. But war is not a fairy tale. With every victory came new scars. Missions turned darker. The enemy grew desperate. Battles became bloodier. And through it all, she remained unbroken, unstoppable. Yet deep within, the cracks formed. At night, when no one saw, she sat alone, her hands trembling from memories she couldn't erase. She was proud, yes, but pride was a lonely thing. And then came the day that would test her more than any battle had before. A mission whispered only in shadows, a risk no one wanted to take. They called her again, not because they believed she would obey, but because they knew she was the only one who could do it. The hangar doors opened, the engines roared, and she climbed into her seat. The weight of the world sat behind her eyes, but her voice on the radio was steady. "This is Falcon. I'm airborne." The soldiers below watched as she disappeared into the clouds once more, their salutes raised high, their silence heavy with awe. The general stood among them, his jaw tight, his pride swallowed by the truth he could no longer deny. She was more than a soldier. She was the very spirit of their fight. And as her jet cut across the sky, the world held its breath. For heroes weren't born. They were forged in fire. And she, against every odd, was the flame that refused to go out.